I have a favorite book that I've been telling everybody about. I talk about hacking college. I was trying to figure this out. I was walking my dogs and I was like, do I talk about this every day? Because I didn't want to exaggerate with the two of you. You know, I don't like to blow smoke up people's parts. I like to be honest. And this book, Hacking College, I have mentioned at every event. I think that the two of you have written one of the most important books on education and higher ed that I've ever come across. Okay. I mean, I'm really building this up. Now, I don't know if you both think that, but give me your sense of how important you think the book Hacking College is, and I'm with Scott Carlson. And Ned, do you use your middle name when you're having casual conversations?
No, not
Because
at
it's Ned,
all.
because it's Ned Scott Laugh, and I want to respect you. And I don't know if if you want me to call you Ned Scott.
No, Ned's fine. Ned's
I know.
fine.
I've actually watched other interviews, and I know people call you Ned. So, but I did want to make sure. So, because I have so much respect for the both of you. So, when it comes to hacking college and just what this book means to both of you, help me to understand because I don't know if it means more to me than it does to you.
Well, it means a hell of a lot to us, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But yeah, no, I mean, I think like, I mean, for me, just thinking about it, like, I think the story that it tells is kind of like, it's the story that I kind of went through going through college. And I think it's the story that a lot of students feel like they go through when they go through college. And that's why I think that's part of the appeal of it. That's why people are like, oh yes, or this is how he should have done it. Right. That's what a lot of people say
yeah.
too. Yeah.
Ned, how do you feel about the book?
I have to tell you, I'm so happy with the way it came out. Um, it's it captures something, and I think um, for me, it's almost as if right now, given what's going on in higher education, the timing for something like this is right. And so we at first, when the book first came out, it just all of a sudden rocketed. And I mean, Scott and I looked at each other, and it was like, oh my God. And then Greg Britton, who very much helped us get this going, kept coming back and saying, I'm surprised. I misjudged. I'm surprised. I misjudged. And we're finding people who are reading it and it resonates with them. It gives them a language and a conceptual frame to clarify what they've been struggling to do.
Yeah.
I think it's super important for Ned too, because like he was saying these things for years and screaming them into the void,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, I
And like
was.
nobody's listening to him. And then finally we get this book out and then it's like
Yeah.
everybody's like, oh, this is really interesting. So
Oh, I love that. And for me, I'm an audiobook reader. So I was so grateful that I could listen to it. And I was listening and I was talking to my wife and I pulled over and I said, I can't believe how important and how good like they're right. They've got it. They know. And Ned, I know that you've been doing this for years and I'm a Chicagoan. I live in the suburbs now, but I'm from Chicago. So I loved hearing about students going to DePaul or Loyola or these schools that are looked at as being uh, better than, and you're at Governor State. Like,
Yes.
help people to understand what Governor State University is, because I think it really is important to the story.
Governor State was originally started as a 2-year completion program and to put a university presence in the Southlands of Chicago. It is very much close to being open admission. And Governor State was the last stop on a tour that I started when I left the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Because the critique I got was, yeah, you're at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, but what about my school? I'm a small 4-year, or I deal with, I'm a primarily Hispanic serving institution. Will it work here? So I took like a career road trip on different campuses, and Governor State was the last stop. And it was amazing because the program was started off a grant. And I'm going to be real honest. The office they put us in was across from the bursar, about as out of the way of student traffic as you could possibly imagine. And within 3 weeks, the office was packed. You couldn't get in, because what happened was word got out to students from students, and the students just kept coming in, and we kept showing them how to do this process and how to make it work. And what was crazy was it just took off. And so
many years ago, because you've been doing this you were at Governor State for how long?
I was only at Governor State for 2 years, and this was 7 years ago.
Oh, I didn't realize that. So at Governor State, you came in with all of this knowledge and understanding this process.
It was the last part of a field test. And at the time that I was there, I do have to say this and I want to say this in the most humble and joyful ways, I started harassing Scott by email.
Yeah. I was wondering how your relationship, and I just want for everybody listening or watching. So the book is Hacking College, Why the Major Doesn't Matter and What Really Does. And I'm here with Ned Laff and Scott Carlson. And the two of them have presented a framework on how to approach college, how to go to college, and not to surrender to the school's moving walkway or the system, but to go in there and to be intentional and to have a want and to explore and be curious and to really get the most out of this experience. Because it's not really like hacking college. What it is knowing how to get the most value out of college and being the one who's in control, not just of your education, but of your life. And this book presents a blueprint, a map that helps so many students to know how to do this. And it's so important because we live in a world that's constantly changing because of technology. We live in a world where there is no such thing as certainty when it comes to a career path. So reinforcing this idea that as a student, you are the one who can employ these strategies to not only help yourself to find a field of interest in a career that excites you and interests you, where you can be successful, but how to employ these strategies throughout your life. So, that's why, I mean, I get it. And I got to chill out because I get so excited. And I really I get it. And I know, and I appreciate Ned. Like, I can imagine you telling people for years, and then you said you reached out to Scott, and Scott, I want to understand, your everyday role and how you and Ned connected in this way.
Yeah. So, I've been a writer for the Chronicle of Higher Education for 25 years. And most people I think probably in the country haven't heard of the Chronicle of Higher Education, but it's basically like the New York Times of the academic world or the Wall Street Journal of the academic world. It's like one of the oldest papers that covers higher ed, and that's all it covers, right? And higher ed, I was just talking about this. I'm here at the University of New England right now. That's why the background behind me looks so weird. But I was just talking with somebody here from the University of New England about what they do, which is just they're just a very specialized little sort of medical health program here in Maine, a private university. Institutions are just so complex in so many ways, higher education institutions. The general public just has no way of understanding really just how complicated these organizations are in terms of what they do. People see it in terms of the students and the student life and the courses that are offered and the degrees that come out on the back end. But, these are also organizations that run, massive sports organizations as part of it, or they are running airports or hospitals. They have all these finance parts of the field that nobody ever really looks at, and it's all very, very complex. So the Chronicle, for a lot of years, I was covering a lot of this stuff having to do with finance, having to do with the sustainability of higher education. Like, where are things going right now? What's this whole question that people have about the value of higher education? And I was doing a lot of stuff also on the future of work. And that's higher education and the future of work are very much tied together. We sort of idealize higher education as this thing that's about personal development, but more and more students and families are going because they need a job at the end of it. So in writing a lot of these reports about this world, I would get these letters from Ned occasionally now and then. This started like in 2017, 2018. And he was writing me saying, like, there's a better way for students to go through this. And this is why while we were reporting on all of the issues that students are having, just lacking the clarity about like how to make sense about their college degree. So finally in 2020, I go to Chicago. I had a friend there, and I sat down with Ned and just started talking with him. And one of the things that came out of that conversation, like I was saying before, was that I started to recognize pieces of what Ned was talking about in my own experience, in my own way that I went through it, like what actually sort of like drove me through the process. And what I found that drove me through the process was, first of all, I had a strong sense of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And I was sort of uncompromising about that. I knew that I was a good writer, and I knew that I wanted to go into the world of writing. I didn't really have a sense about how to do that. And so I just sort of like fumbled my way into an English literature major thinking, well, being a novelist or having that kind of background would be, vaguely, important. And from there, I had a number of other people help me. I had people in my family who said, oh, you need internships. They would sort of gave me crucial pieces of advice along the way that allowed me to make that English literature degree into something that's a real job today, right? A lot of students really miss those opportunities. You really need sort of like one door opened. And I saw that in what Ned was talking about, like how you start to open these doors. How do you show the students where the doors are and then get them to open these doors themselves? That agency part is super crucial, because I think so many students right now are going through the process doing what they think their parents want them to do, or doing what they think the media is telling them to do, or doing what they think the formula is, like I've got to pick the right major or whatever it is. And in writing this book, getting together with Ned, realizing like what are the patterns that really get students through. I mean, I found this to be like such an important and really interesting, project to work on, to really show people like, what is this thing really all about? How does it really work? Drawing from the background that I have about higher education, this extremely complex, entity.
Right. So, as a reporter and a journalist, you want to obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, do you believe in like facts and credible sources?
Oh,
Is that
absolutely.
important to you? Okay. I just need to double check. It's an important question to ask. So when you started to get to know Ned and understand his background and his life experiences, how did that influence you wanting to commit? And is there anything that really stood out or continues to stand out?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's been interesting about our partnership in writing this is that, it's not the situation with Hacking College is that I'm not just ghostwriting this book for Ned, right? It's a union of our two brains about what this problem is that's facing higher education. But the interesting part of it for me was that, I'd spent 25 years as a higher education reporter, or about 20 when I met Ned, right? And a lot of the things we're told about how college works or how things actually are in higher education is not how they actually are. It was really interesting for me to get together with a guy and write a book with him, a guy who had spent, decades in the underbelly of higher education and like at these colleges, and really seeing like how these students are guided through and what are these barriers that they actually encounter, not what the sort of the talking heads out there are talking about in terms of what they encounter. And a lot of it that we talk about in Hacking College is just sort of the bureaucratic self-interest, the way that the colleges sort of like pay attention to their own numbers or their own goals at the student's expense. And then that's a piece of why the students end up getting lost in college.
So, Ned, I want to know, when you were uncovering this, and we're going to get into the specifics of what Hacking College is, but I really feel that where you both are coming from and why this is something you chose to spend your time doing has a lot of value, because I can tell with how it's written and just how it's researched. And, I love the real life experiences. and Ned, I know you've had a lot of these real life experiences when you were working at an institution and you wanting to scream from the rooftop. What is it that you wanted to scream, and what is it that people needed to hear?
What I was going after was this: college, and I don't care who the student is, can be absolutely the most transformative experience, period. And students can engage this in a way that is meaningful and purposeful to them. And when they do this, right, all of a sudden, they're not getting a degree at, they are taking charge of their own education. And when they start to take care of their own education and take charge of it, they take care of it. They better engage. They make it doesn't become a question of sacrificing or trying to just get through the system. And the other thing I was trying to convey, especially when I started working at smaller institutions or institutions that were struggling with enrollments, is your school can become a dream school if you just look at the ways that students can take advantage of what you already have on campus. I mean, college campuses in so many ways are totally dysfunctional. And they're at war with each other. I mean, the departments are at war with each other. There's this battle for FTE. It goes on and on. Even the concept of tenure is interesting, because you have to ask the question of, who are we competing with, or what are we competing for, or what are we trying to actually accomplish? And my argument was, and is that there is no either or in this game. You can put together quality undergraduate experiences for students without changing the system if you begin to really listen to what's going on. And then if institutions took a hard look at themselves and said, how can we not necessarily pick the schools we want to compete against, how can we be great? And becoming great, what Hacking College shows is that students can start at schools that anyone might say is, you're not going to go anywhere from there, and end up like Monique, I'm starting an ED psych at the University of Chicago Hospitals. It sounds improbable, right? It sounds improbable, but it isn't. It is absolutely possible to do this. And all it takes, it's so crazy, change the damn conversations you're having. That's it.
Right. So that's what you're screaming, is change the damn conversations, because the conversations that so many students and advisors are having are not about what is it that you want. It's about, here's what we want you to do in
Right.
order to get this degree. And I spend a lot of my time asking students the question, what do you want? What do you really want? And that's where they struggle, because they want to make sure that they want something that's going to be safe.
Yeah.
They want to make sure they're going to be successful. And they
Yes.
want to make sure that a lot of times mom and dad say that's a good choice.
Right.
So this idea of freely wanting, it also takes buy-in from parents or whoever it is that's the partner in a student's education. And I think so much of the fear of change comes with the uncertainty. And we're at this crossroads now
Yes.
of, because of technology, because of this revolution we're in terms of just,
Mhm.
careers are being disrupted. Every field is being disrupted. That the only, in my in my world, the only way to create certainty is to be able to answer that question, what do I want? And then be able to find the answers. And this is where
Yes.
I do my best to try and not talk about me in this, but this is where I was jumping out of my skin while I was listening to this, because I look at myself as a schmo sometimes, right? Like I started writing an advice column. I mean, I'm not a schmo. I'm a smart, educated person, but like I I think because it's my ADHD. I don't start with the textbooks and the theories. I start with what excites me and looks interesting. That's what drives me. That's what motivates me. That's why I wasn't a great student, because a lot of things that they're teaching, I'm not interested in. But when I get excited, I have this wild curiosity, and this is the framework, and I'll share Win or Learn with you both as well, because this framework is what do I want, what makes me uncomfortable, then it's people, places, patience, right? And then I tell a story, you tell the stories if it happened, and you celebrate, reflect, and repeat. So that's kind of like my framework for life. And I was reading Hacking College, and we'll get to the strategies, but I was like, oh gosh, I can't believe this is so exciting, because what Ned and Scott are telling students is start with the people and the places doing the things that interest and excite you, and use your wild curiosity to connect with these people and then deconstruct your path. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes.
Yes.
So,
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
And
There's what I like to tell when I train people like peer mentors or anybody else, there are 50 different ways to get from Chicago to Denver, right? How are you going to plot your way there, right? I want to go into business. There are 10,000 different ways to do this, and none of them necessarily include getting a business major. Here's
right.
how it fits your best strength, where you want to go, and that crazy thing you're thinking about, it's real.
Yeah, and crucially, I think that leaning into what you are all about, what your disposition is, I think is it is a hidden strength of the program because, especially as we're heading into AI and a point where jobs are going to be upended in all sorts of ways, I think people have to lean into the things that they care about and how they engage with the world, and how their mind is sort of framed in the first place. I mean, in my case, like I'm a storyteller, right? That's how my mind is framed around stories. And so for me to lean into that, for me to become an engineer or try to go for something that's like a more quote unquote lucrative environment or like lucrative career, I mean, that just never would have worked out for me. I was lucky to have the strength to be able to say to myself, I want to go after the thing that this is actually what fires me up. This is what I care about. And I'm going to commit to that. Those are the things I think that we argue lead to success. And it's also part of the driver that leads students to be able to make contacts out there in the world.
Right.
You're making contacts with people that you share these affinities with.
Right. I think as a general rule, if a student wants to pursue a particular career path, or there's someone who's doing a job they want to do, they have to talk to 3 people who are doing the things they want to do,
Mhm.
and they need to learn how they got there, understanding the different pivot points in their life where they made their different decisions. So it's the pathways, and then it's those different junctions where they've made those decisions, kind of connecting the dots, but being able to talk to those people and have that be the starting point as opposed to the major. And speaking to that in some of the case studies that you share in the book, I would love for you to share, if each of you can share the one that really lights you up the most and break down those pivot points.
I have a difficult time with this because each student in the book is an archetype, right? They represent thousands like them, and each of the stories are special. Just today, right? The one that I've been thinking about, because I have to tell you, I went to Jewel Osco on Chicago Avenue today, right? And I knew I was getting ready for this the interview with you, and that's where Diana Vega worked. And that whole thing was so totally improbable, right? So totally improbable to have conversations at a checkout line. And I was talking to Chris, my partner, and I was saying to her, you know what? The total amount of time it took me to work with Diana, if I added it up, was probably maybe 20 hours. But when you spread it out over 5 to 10 minutes at a checkout line, and what she accomplished. I mean, it's not what she accomplished. It was her self-revelation, and the transformation in her was like incredible. But then again, I love Monique, and Shay is working down at Northwestern, and I'm having lunch with her next week. And all these students, there's something special about all of them.
Can you, for those who aren't familiar with the stories, to just give us kind of like a bullet point of the journey from meeting at Jewel Osco to the life journey? And by the way, I worked at Jewel Osco. I don't know if you know that. I mean, we didn't meet at Jewel Osco, but that was my first job. I have this thing because I joke with my kids because I always talk about I worked at Jewel Osco. I worked at Jewel. It was interesting. I used to push the carts, and it was a really good experience. I was a great bagger. I'm so good at bagging, but I love the interactions. And if you can summarize that and help people just to understand, using which student was this again at Jewel? This was
Diana Vega. She's chapter 7, the last chapter.
Yeah. So if you could, can you briefly just summarize, the story?
Yeah, every Saturday morning I go to Jewel. I go to that Jewel to get groceries, and every Saturday morning for it must have been about 7 years, right? She's there. She was one of the people who opened Jewel, and she was excellent, and she was just a typical person, right? Sometimes I'd come in, her hair would be a different color. She'd have different nail polish on, but she was efficient. She was wonderful to talk to for the 5 minutes or 7 minutes that I was there. And one time I walked in and she had this existential look on her face, like, what the hell am I doing here? So on that day, I just asked her, so are you a college student? And she said, no, I graduated. That was it. I'm out the door, right? Person behind me. So the next time I'm there, I said, well, what did you graduate in? And she said, well, I was psychology. And so then I asked her, well, what was your GPA? So she tells me her GPA, out the door. And then I come back next week.
What was the GPA?
Her GPA was like a 3.9. Right. This is right. So I come back the next week, and this is how it started. I said, you graduated magna cum laude. And she said to me, is that important? And I said, okay, I don't mean to pry. And I had to convince her I'm not some, creep, right? Would you send me, here's my email. Would you send me your resume? I look at her resume. All the pieces, everything is right there, right? It's like it's right there, and she couldn't see it. And she didn't have one reference that came from DePaul. All the references were from Jewel. And that's what started the conversations. And it was just step by step. She did everything I asked her to do. Everything began to fall exactly in place.
What did you ask her to do for people who want to understand?
I said, okay, so talk to me about why you're here. So she tells me, right, first in her family to go to college, a typical, I want to get this out right, a typical DACA family, right? She came through her father. Undocumented, mother's doing this, brother dropped out of college. Her sister took a couple of years, but was making good money at California Pizza at Old Orchard. We're going through this. And I said, okay, talk to me. I don't want kids to fall through the crack the way I did. There you go. Now I've got the why. Now I've got the purpose. So then I start talking to her about let's look at, I want you to identify these things and come back with names. I told her how to do this. She
Identify what things?
identify the difference between going for an LCSW in social work versus going for a master's in counseling. This is what I want you to look for. I'll be back next week. She goes out, she does the work, she comes back in. Then I said, here's the people, get the name of these people, set up the appointments. Off she goes and does the
What
appointments.
people? What people?
Faculty. And I taught her how to look at faculty by their field of study specialty, how to identify them. She calls up, we prep her for the interviews. I'm prepping her, right? I'm wondering about the people who are behind me wanting to check
Oh, this
out.
is all happening
This is
every
all at
week?
every week at the checkout line at the Jewel, right? And so she just steps right through the process, right? And so when you look at, when I was looking at her transcript, she has certification in Spanish translation. So she's a certified translator because she was dealing with friends and families issues when they would go to the doctor or talk to lawyers, right? She's got that in place. She's got but she couldn't see how the pieces fit together. So now all of a sudden she's talking to people. Then I start sending her to faculty to talk about coming to study with them for grad school. She comes back with the information. She sits down. Well, we talk at the checkout line. She sorts through it. Boom, she's off to Loyola University because it offers a program where she could do both the LCSW and get ready to work in the school systems, which is where she wanted to work, right? And then where does she get her her field placement? District 65, right? Evanston Township. This is incredible stuff, right? All because, right? And she did all the work.
Right.
All I'm doing is like, well, do this. Do this. Here's the conversation. Boom.
Right. And that's what you do. You're the person who is in her corner to help her to find other people who could be in her corner to then map out a path, people who believed in her and saw
Yes.
her gifts. And it was that connection of the people and the social capital, which you talk a lot about in the book.
Yes.
You know, Diana didn't have that social capital
Right.
and didn't know how to find it. And fortunately your paths crossed and her life is she's not a jewel anymore, and she's aligned with her light and more of her purpose.
And what shook her up and surprised her was every time you get on the phone, you tell them, "Hi, my name is Diana. I'm a magna cum laude graduate from DePaul University." It stunned her how quickly people said, "Come in, I want to talk with you."
Yeah. Yeah. And like you're saying, change the damn conversation.
Yeah, but the other thing that's interesting is this. If you're a magna cum laude student, you're crushing classes.
Yeah.
That's it. You're crushing them.
Right.
And nobody walked up to her and said, "Who the hell are you? What are you about? What do you want to get going?" They just processed. She was just being processed through the system.
Right. And if you don't take the initiative or even know, because I have so many students who will resist when I say talk to your professors, because a lot of the professors, they're not going to be proactive. They're not going to engage with you. It's a different dynamic. And I tell them, listen, if you fail a, a exam, if you struggle, I go, this is a gift because you have a reason to talk to them. But here you have Diana, who is crushing her classes, who's being so successful that doesn't have a problem. So because there isn't a problem, there isn't a reason to talk to these instructors. I mean, there are reasons when someone has a conversation with you and you change the conversation and help them to ask reflective questions about where do you want to go and who are the people doing it and what's that path. And that's the power of having an advisor, someone in your corner who can guide you, but not everyone has that. The majority of people don't. And that's why Hacking College is a book that I think is so important because it really presents this, and it makes it emphasizes why having agency, talking to people, allowing them to see your gifts and seeking information, not even seeking jobs, seeking information from people who are living the
Yeah.
lives you want to live. That's not a big ask.
No. I want to put Scott on the
Yeah.
on the mark here because he had this great experience at Central Michigan. I just it's one of my favorite memories right now.
Yeah, I mean, at Central Michigan, what Ned is talking about is we did a series of talks at Central Michigan with a number of students, and one of the classes we visited was a philosophy class, and there was a student sitting at the front of the philosophy class who was sort of listening to what we were talking about, like how do you, and we can get into a little bit of the method here. The method is
Yeah.
stop thinking about what is the major that you're trying to go after, and that's what most students go for, right? Like I need to pick a major that has an high average salary or that seems to sound like a job in some way, and that's going to set me up after college. So when you're a student and you've picked a major like sociology or French or philosophy, you might be thinking like, well, what do I do with that after I graduate, right? That doesn't sound like a job. And all the metrics associated with what's your average salary with a philosophy major might not be as high as, say, finance or data analytics or whatever it is, right? So students are using that major as sort of a proxy for what they want to do. So I was sitting in a philosophy class talking to all these students, and then there's this woman at the front of the philosophy class who's listening to what we're saying. And then she came to us after the class was over and said, I love philosophy, I love religion. I just, and my dad keeps asking me like, what are you going to do with this? And I don't know what to do with it. And so we got her to start thinking about what is that thing you want to do, or what is that world you want to enter? What's that hidden intellectualism? What's that vocational purpose, right? And so what she came back to us was, I'm really into death. I think death is really interesting. Near-death experiences, what happens to people after they die, like what happens during the death process, like all of that stuff I think is pretty interesting, right? That's those jobs that would be in that world are what we would call that hidden job world, right? This hidden job market that's out there. And most people would talk about the hidden job market in terms of like those jobs that you get through nepotism. Your sister knows of an opening at an organization and she tells you about it. And then you give your resume to your sister, she gives it to her friend, and then you're able to land this job that wasn't on Monster or LinkedIn, right? Or Indeed or whatever it is. We take that hidden job concept and we expand it to say that hidden jobs are all those jobs that you don't really know about, that you don't really think about as an 18 to 22-year-old or as a 28-year-old or as a 37-year-old or sometimes as a 48-year-old, and there are these jobs that exist deep within these corporate organizations, or exist in these small to medium-sized firms or in these specialty occupations that just never arrive at a college campus or a college career center, right? And so when you think about the world of death that this young woman was interested in, there's all sorts of things to do in the world of death. We started looking up stuff with her on the internet, and it's, you do Google searches, and there's people who study the near-death experience. There's people who put, nodes on people's skulls as they're dying and measure the electrical activity and the neurological activity that's happening in there. There are people that look at parapsychology and is there life after death? What evidence is there for that? There are people who play music for the dead, or people who work in palliative care. This is people who talk to families about like this. Your mother is dying. Let's deal with that right now. There are people who work at places like Hopkins who are giving things like psychedelics to people who have terminal cancer that allows them to open their minds and accept this notion that they're going to die within 6 months or whatever it is. So the world of death is huge, right? And we started pointing this out to this young woman in philosophy and religion. And all of a sudden she's like, oh, now I can see how I can connect some of what I want to do to the world outside. And ideally, and this is part of the process, right? You go and you talk to those people out in the world out there who occupy these hidden job positions. And then you take from them the skills, the kinds of background experiences, you gather sort of information about what they're interested in and where their world is going. And then you translate that back into your college experience. And what you're doing by that, the most important part that you're doing about that is not just picking a major, because I think everybody hyper focuses on the major. But the major, what most people don't realize, is only about 30% of the credits that you're going to take in college, right? So it's the 70% that exist in what we call the blank spaces. That's where the power of the degree is. That's how you take a major in philosophy or a major in sociology and you add in things like business or maybe design thinking or, art direction or art studies, or you throw in maybe some, some accounting or some data analytics or stats, and you're able to do different things with these majors because you have a different sort of skill set that you're putting together, that you're marrying them with, right? This is a super important part of what the college experience is all about. It's all about this multidisciplinarity, and that's this multidisciplinary systems-oriented world is the world that we're in right now and that we're heading toward, and faster than we can imagine.
So that's such a great example of how a student goes from not knowing what they want to really seeing, what is the end result, and leapfrogging all of the other pieces, and then deconstructing. And then what's really cool is once you find those people who are putting the nodes. I didn't know there's a job where you put the nodes before they die. That's so cool. It's so interesting. And then finding the person who's putting the nodes on people's heads before they die, and then you get the name of the person, and then you look them up on LinkedIn, and you get, because I do a lot of work with Gear Up. I don't know if you're familiar with the Gear Up programs, and for a lot of low income, a lot of first generation students, and I do these video projects, and I interview students. I'll share these to you offline, just because I do so much stuff that people have no idea that I do, and it's this obsession with the story, Scott. Like, I love the story, and what I find is I'm working with Gear Up Southern West Virginia. It's some of the poorest school districts in our nation, and I am going to be interviewing uh, recent grads, seniors in college, people who are in the places who are living these experiences, with this understanding that if we can deconstruct where you are now and show where you went to college, show where you went to high school, show where you went to middle school, where the people's family, they're
Yes.
familiar, and you see, wow, this is someone who's just like me, who's doing something so extraordinary, and that's what we're talking about here.
Yes.
But there's something else I want to mention, and this is something that Scott pulled out when he was working with this student. We like to say students don't know what they want to do. That may not necessarily be the case. The way we have the system set up, they may be looking at the system and say, I have to pick X because I don't see a major that says, I want to work in the world, somehow in the
Yeah.
world that's encompassed by death. But when you drop the concept of the major and you think in terms of field of study, and then students, after they do their research and translate this into learning opportunities on campus, it's like, ready, taking a bag of coins to the Jewel Osco and dropping it in that change machine, right? That sorts the pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters. That's what happens. And then all of a sudden, yes, I'm underneath the umbrella of this major, philosophy. But when you ask me what I'm doing, here's my field of study. They learn a language. And with that language, they learn how to work the college system.
Right. And in that sense, I think it's very, very much similar. This is the way that people can sort of conceptualize it.
Yeah.
It's very similar to how the faculty are, right? A faculty person is not just a history professor. It's not just a philosophy professor. It's a person in the history department, but they have a specialty in Southern food culture, which means that they are pulling together study from environmental studies, from Native American culture, from the Atlantic slave trade, from African agriculture, from, all of these different places. They're pulling all of these different strains of thought together. And what they have is their field of study, but it's not just history, right?
Ooh, I like how you put that, because field of study is another key term, and maybe even sometime in the future, if you two were up for it, it'd be a really fun game to have students share their to kind of share their major, students who don't really know what they want, and to kind of play the game of let's give you a roadmap during a live conversation and really show it in real life. So if you're game for that, I think it'd be
Oh,
fun.
yeah.
It's like, that's right. That's the magic, right? Isn't that so
Yeah.
much fun? I love that part. And what you've created is a cookbook, and you have certain terms, and there's a certain framework. And I know that in chapter one, and just to run through, chapter one, blank spaces. And I know that, Scott, you just touched upon the idea of these blank spaces that give students an opportunity to really fill in their schedules. And then field of study. Well, field of study, then in those blank spaces, you find those other areas of interest that are related to the thing you think you want to do.
Right.
And that's field of study. Because the field of study, I was really struggling to articulate that, um, of how field of study, like, can you give me, so for a student who's listening, or a parent who's listening and says, hey, instead of focusing on major, focus on field of study.
Right.
Can one of you break that down into just the fundamentals in the simplest terms?
Okay, so I'm working with a first generation Latino who's being pushed into computer science because short crosswalk, first generation, and computer science opens up jobs. And when I met him, he was just depressed. He's in intro to computer science. He hates what he's doing. And he says the instructor is just boring the hell out of me. Okay, tell me if you could do what you wanted to do, what would it be? And it took me a while for him to trust me to tell me. And he said, I want to do Ready Player One. Great. Okay, so for me, that opens up this whole field of study. For him, he was only seeing Ready Player One and couldn't see how to connect it to anything on campus because there's no major called Ready Player One. So,
Like the VR, like the movie Ready
like
Player
the
One.
movie and like the book. So,
Right.
and he was told, and this is important, put your childhood things on the shelf and get real. So I tell him to go to his computer science instructor during office hours and walk in and say, I really want to do Ready Player One, because no students taught to see faculty as field of study specialists. Well, this faculty member who was teaching computer science was the director of the electronic visualization lab.
Wow.
Right? Now, he says to him, I hate teaching this course. We all have to teach it, and we all hate teaching it because we really want to do this stuff. So now these two, right? Now, this is an important part that Scott and I talk about in the book. This is where interest meets interest, and the emotive expression is, I'm following my passion. So all of a sudden, Ready Player One spreads out into the big hidden job market of virtual reality.
Yeah.
Right? So now here's the field of study. The virtual reality are just pieces of computer science. But then the computer science instructor says to him, you got to get storyboarding in. You got to get some video in. So you're going to need to go over to the film department. And who would normally tell somebody in computer science, go over to film and get involved in this aspect of art, right? So now the student starts pulling pieces together, right? Find out about narrative form. When you're doing your gen ed and you have to take that literature course requirement, look at this course because it's going to interest you and it's going to get you involved in narrative. So now the student's making choices, right? And filling in the blank spaces, which are relevant to one, Ready Player One, two, relevant to this whole world of virtual reality, and three, opening the door to being able to do stuff in that electronic visualization lab, which is part of the college campus, and students are never introduced to it.
There's a crucial thing here, Harlan, in the sense that, colleges just don't have the capacity to be able to build programs like that if new things are popping out there, if there's sort of new directions or novel sort of areas that the world is heading, right? Colleges, they need at least like 2 or 3 years to come up with a new program or a new course or a new major. Like it could take even longer, right? So what we're saying is the world is changing very fast. Students are going to have a sense of what's going on out there. You're able to go to any program or build any program you want through this field of study process because you're pulling all of these pieces from all these different places from across the campus.
Right. And faculty are at the cutting edge of a lot of their stuff. It's just that the process, if you wanted to create a new course, I'm offering it for a year or two as a special topics. Then I have to take it through committee in my department. Then I have to take it through committee in my college. Then I have to take it through faculty senate to get it approved. And by the time the thing is done, it's already obsolete.
Right. And the world is moving.
And the world is moving.
Now. Right. It's not just what's happening in terms of
right. And so when you look at these blank spaces, and you've seen it, I want to be a psych major. Here are the 3 required courses: intro, psych stats, research methods. Here's the list of courses out of social and developmental.
Yeah.
Here's the list of courses out of the biological side. Pick 6 courses. And then what do you do with the rest?
Right. Even studying, when you were talking about the CS student who wants to do Ready Player One, I was thinking, and study abroad, because in order to go to different locations and have life experiences, you need to have those. And if you're worried about paying for it, then ask your instructor, what opportunities are there to get some funding to be helped. And that's what you do. You lay this out. So here's the situation here I have. So there are 7 chapters in this book, and I'm encouraging everybody, Get Hacking College, Why the Major Doesn't Matter and What Really Does. It's by Ned Laff, Scott Carlson. We have them here. I'm so grateful. It's the coolest thing. Like for me, to read a book, you've no idea, Ned, how excited I was when I pulled over. I said to my wife, because I don't know, I just feel like, again, I don't think I'm any more special than anyone else. I just think that if I am reading something or connecting with something and emoting with something that excites me, I want to be close to the people who are creating it. So I'm like, I'll just send them a note. And it's like, and you responded right away. And I was like, damn, this is so cool, because like we are living, all of us, we are living field of study constantly. And we're constantly filling in the blanks. But if we're too scared to take risks because we're not going to get what we want, or we measure success based on an outcome rather than the experience, we lose. And you give people permission to have experiences. So, okay, I got to stay focused. There's 7 chapters in this book: blank spaces, the curricular maze, the wicked problem, the hidden job market, the liberal arts and field of study, the need for hacking, visible students, and agile institutions. I say agile. Did you say agile? Agile.
I say agile.
I want to say agile. Yeah. So here's what I would love. I would love to just go through. I know we talked a little bit about the first 2, but can you just bullet point the takeaways and the importance of each of these in our remaining time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, as we're thinking about the different concepts that are important in hacking college, and we talked about like how you do it, right? So you stop focusing on the major, focus on what's that hidden intellectualism, what's that vocational purpose, what's that wicked problem you want to solve in the world, what's that world you want to enter, what's that thing you're obsessed with, what's that thing, as Ned sometimes says, what's that thing that you will shut out the noise for, that you will absolutely go for. I mean, I think that's an important starting point. And of course, you can talk about discernment for a long time, right? That's sort of an endless conversation. And people who are midlife are still talking about discernment. But at some point, you have to make a decision, right? So especially if you're in college. So when you're in college, you decide on whatever you're going to do. And for us, it's anything is valid, right? So you're heading out into that world. We want you to talk to people. There's the research investigative inquiry part of it, which is important. So you've identified the world you want to enter. You've identified that there's a hidden job market tied to it. And then what you want to do is you want to, as you were saying, sort of like go out into the world and find those people and talk to them. And it's not just going to be this standard informational interview kind of questioning, which is like, oh, do you like your job? What's your office like? How are the hours? You know, blah, blah, blah. No, what you want to do is you want to make a connection with that person based on this common interest that you have. This is one of the key pieces that we're talking about with the Hacking College method, which is that social capital doesn't just happen because you introduce somebody to somebody else. It happens because these two people have something in common that they're really sort of interested in or that they groove on together. And then the relationship is formed, and that's where the social capital happens, right? So a student going out into the world, we're saying tap into that passion that you have because you're going to connect with this other person over the passion. So for students that have approached me as a journalist, right, as a narrative form journalist, they're going to say, oh, I read Alec Wilkinson and I'm really into David Remnick and I love Burkhard Bilger. I read the New Yorker all the time. And like, I will come back to them and say, oh yeah, well, have you read Richard Manning? What do you know about, what do you know about some of these writers from the 50s that were doing like interesting narrative work, right? And I would talk to them about whatever I'm interested in, right? And then we have a connection over that.
Yeah.
That then it's much more clear that the student is going to, at the end of the conversation, say, hey, I need experience. Can I have a job shadowing opportunity? Do you have an internship here? Do you know anybody I can talk to about getting experience? It's much more likely that person is going to connect that student with somebody important or with their own company, because they see that the student is already invested. So you gather these skills, you understand that world, and you have to fill in these blank spaces intentionally. This is where the empty college degree comes from. This is what we talk about in the book. And this is why students wind up after college, working at Starbucks or working at the bar or working at the Gap or like Diana, working at Jewel Osco, right? It's because they didn't really fill in the spaces correctly. They didn't figure out how to create a story around their undergraduate experience, right? So it's more than just picking a major. You're starting to understand, it's most students, as we say, you go through, you pick a major, and then most students kind of say, well, what do I do with the rest of the blank spaces? It's like, oh, well, that looks easy. I hear that professor's cool. All my friends in that class, right? We want you to be more intentional and to build this spectrum of skills that you're going to need coming out by using those blank spaces intentionally. So that's really sort of the method in a nutshell. And then trying, using the various contacts you make and the story that you've gathered from the educational experience that you've created to sort of start to pave your way outside in the world.
Right.
We think that the students that are more conscious about building these kinds of experiences are going to be much more able to shift later in life because they understand where they're coming from with their own skills. They know how they've gathered these skills. They know how these skills sit in context out in the world. That's the important part about being able to transfer them to other careers, other opportunities, other lives.
And the process challenges the institutional think that's out there. So chapter 2 is about how the institutional think gets in the way of a student succeeding. But the RII opens up other things. So for instance, the whole field of study process is outlined in chapter 3. And one of the critical things was, I'm in South Carolina, right? I dial the phone, give it to Shay. She's on the phone with young Chicago authors, louder than a bomb, right? She's talking to them. She's getting all pumped up. When she took advantage of the Washington semester program, she called them back on the phone and asked, who can I contact in Washington, D.C.? And they said, oh, yeah, here, split this rock. Here's the phone number, right? Boom, that opens up that opportunity, which is, right, this is important. For first-generation low-income kids or kids coming from lower middle-class backgrounds, this is the kind of networking they can create from themselves, which kids from, say, Highland Park or Lake Forest already have because it's in their families.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so powerful, and it really does provide access, and it gives students and parents a guide on how to create that social capital, build that social capital. And I'd say the one thing for a future conversation is, one of my areas of curiosity is rejection. and fear of rejection, and how that plays into the ability to go after what you want,
Yeah.
to make that call. You know, you're in her corner, you're in Shay's corner saying, hey, here's who you call, here's what we can do. Shay then realizes, wow, these people are kind, I'm worthy, I'm enough. And that's where an advisor is so important. And I want to get to two things before we wrap. I want you to guide students on what a helpful, valuable advisor does, and what a not helpful and not valuable academic advisor does.
A helpful advisor would start with this question. I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you explain it to me? And the non-helpful advisor is, let's take a look at your schedule and here's how it fits into the degree audit. At that point, it's like you've been on Dan Ryan, right? Going down the Kennedy, one splits off to O'Hare and one takes the Edens Highway up north, right? There's the split. And once that person who says, okay, let's look at your schedule, that nobody's going to come back to them, right? And that's why many students don't go to see advisors, because that's what they're getting. But the person who says, I have no idea what you're talking about, explain it to me. Well, what do you mean? Talk to me about, right, the thing that Scott mentioned. What would you focus on that you would shut the noise out of and really go after? That's what you're looking for. Now, it won't necessarily be phrased that way, but the interaction will capture that.
You know, it's interesting. When I first met Ned, one of the stories that I wrote after meeting him was this story for the Chronicle called "A Crusade Against Terrible Advising," because Ned challenged, you know, when Ned started talking to me about the field of study method, I was like, well, isn't that what advising is supposed to do, right? And he was like, go check out some advising, see what it's all about, you know. And I realized I'd never really sat in on advising. You know, this is this black box, you know, in higher ed. No one ever sees what happens between individual students and individual advisors out there in the world. You just sort of hear the stories later on, right? Like, oh, that advisor didn't tell me anything about how it was supposed to be. So I sat in on some of these meetings, and oh my God, I mean, some of the things that you saw, like, and I described this in A Crusade Against Terrible Advising, and I describe it in the book.
Yeah.
You know, one of the first sessions I see is the student comes in and she says, well, talks to her advisor and says, well, you know, as you know, I'm a political science major because I want to be president of the United States one day. And the advisor's like, yep, okay. And then the student's like, well, now I've got to pick a minor. And the advisor turns to her and says, you know, I've helped students pick minors before and they haven't liked my choices, so you have to pick it yourself, right? And it's like, okay, well, there's two bad pieces of advice that just happened right there. She didn't reorient this young woman around, like, well, what are you going to do, you know, before you become president of the United States? Do you think poli-sci is the way to get there, you know? And then also, like, she's asking for help and you're refusing to help her. I mean, it was an insane moment, right? But I saw that over and over again in some of the advising sessions that I saw, where the advisors were just saying to the students, oh, you want to pick that course? Great. Okay, that fits your schedule. Okay, what do you want to move on to next?
Right.
Right. Instead of like, why are you picking that course? What are we doing here? How does this all fit into a framework?
Yeah.
It's hard to do with a big caseload.
I'm
not defending them, but it's like, I mean, that's the reality. It's like,
well, that's a myth. I have 400 students on my caseload. Really? Did you see 400 students when advising is optional and every student on campus is telling you it isn't worth going in? No, they're not seeing 400 students. There's ways to scale this up, but that's a different conversation.
right.
But the key. Go on, Scott.
I will say that, like, we had a number of conversations with students in the time that we wrote Hacking College. Like, we would visit campuses and talk to students. And in a lot of these cases, we were talking to these students for 30 minutes or less. I mean, that's the average advising,
right,
you know, appointment. And in that 30 minutes, we were like, don't look at your college experience this way. Look at it this way, the way that we're talking about in Hacking College. And the students would be like, oh my God, like, oh yeah, that makes so much more sense. Like, that's how I should be doing it. Yeah. You know, they get it right away. It's just that these conversations are not really happening in advising or in other sort of counseling situations.
Right. And then to keep that momentum going, you could do that by text or email.
Yep. Well, I know you train people. I'm going to wrap things up because I want to be conscious of your time. You train advisors, you do professional development, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So for people who want to learn more about you, they want to learn more about hacking college, can you please let listeners know the best way to continue to learn about you and to benefit from your wisdom? Ned, what's the best way for people to continue to follow
Um,
you?
they can find me on LinkedIn, or I can't believe I'm going to say this because I know this could be dangerous. I'm on Gmail, Ned.Laff, all lowercase. If you want to
Exactly.
chat, contact me. But also parents. I mean, I know we're close, but here's an example. My daughters, because they were living with this their whole entire life, damn, did they hack the system, right? So one of them is on clinical faculty at a Fair to Midland Medical School in New Haven, Connecticut, and the other is this dynamite prosecuting attorney. And everyone asks me, well, I ask them, what did they major in? So, Harlan, what do you think they majored in?
Well, I'm going to say culinary arts and dancing. No, I don't know.
You know what? The prosecuting attorney, BFA in choreography and modern dance.
No way.
Right. She was always going to go to law school. If I
That's
told her
that's
you're going to go
wild.
to law school, she would say, talk to the hand because the head ain't listening. But she was always after social justice. Right.
Wow.
And what she found out was, oh my God, when you're doing trial law, you are doing a choreography and a marvelous performance if you want to win. But here's what my other daughter found out. Wow, French and Spanish. And then I picked up Creole because go to a waiting room in any hospital and listen. And students will come back and they'll say, I must have heard 30 different languages. What does that tell you? 30 different cultural problems in the delivery of healthcare. And why don't you tell me how an invertebrate biology course is going to help you with that?
Boom. Mic drop. Scott, how do people stay in touch with you and follow you?
I am active on LinkedIn. Come find me there. And I do, you can reach me through the Chronicle as well. I write regularly for the Chronicle. I have a weekly column actually that comes out every week called The Edge, which is about all things higher ed on all sorts of topics. So look for
Great.
that, The Edge
Yeah,
from the Chronicle.
that's great. Well, I will share in the show notes anything you want me to share, and we'll share a link to the Edge, and we'll share your information, Ned as well. And I really am so grateful for this conversation. Thank you for taking the time, and I hope we can talk more because as you can see, I'm so excited and so grateful to know you both. And what you're doing is so important. And I suggest everybody get Hacking College, Why the Major Doesn't Matter and What Really Does, by Ned Laff and Scott Carlson. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.